grab a moxor and a sheet of paper with Jonah. No. Wait until, yeah, thank you. Wait until other people. When people are, when we get closer. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. So we know some other people are going to join us, but we want to go up live because we're actually a few minutes late. We want to bring in the people. We're actually streaming this on Facebook right now too, the study of Jonah. So we usually stream our Torah study on Facebook too. So our Tuesday and Wednesday classes are always streamed, so you can watch them even if you're not on Zoom. The good thing about having it on Zoom is that we can have people communicate. But the way we've got this today, we've actually got it enabled so people can chat. Unfortunately, you can only see comments. We can't engage. And actually, I don't think we'll even be able to have a way. I'm trying to see if we have a way of communicating with those people as they're chatting. But we're going to get started. Are we on, Michael? Are we streaming? All right, so we are live now, and again, this is the way we begin the concluding service. So, this is our tradition to have a study of Jonah, and the good thing is that we this is the whole book of Jonah. People oftentimes say to me, this is part of Jonah. This is like the best parts of Jonah, the highlights of Jonah. Now, this is all 4 chapters of Jonah and laid out without chapters because the chapters were later additions to the book. But there are 4 chapters. The first chapter is pretty much everything from the first column all the way to half of the next column is chapter 1. Chapter 2 begins there halfway through and then goes to the top of the next page. And then chapter 3 goes pretty much from the first paragraph there down to about the bottom of that column and the beginning of the next column is chapter 4. So, and it's roughly a column and a half or so, or not quite a column, I guess an average of a column per chapter. So it's not a very large book is my point. And the other interesting thing about it is that we don't know that much about how it was composed. And for those who haven't been here, about half of you have been here before for our readings of Jonah, and about half of you haven't. We've also posted up on the internet right now, as I said, we have it up on Facebook. For people who are watching it there, we're actually putting up the text, so you can actually follow along with the text with us. It is important to have the text in front of you, and I'll tell you, part of the reason is there are things in this story that, believe it or not, even though it's very short and even though it's kind of written in a kind of a very quick tone, there actually is quite a lot here to the text. And there's ways to understand it and decompress it that are important for us to consider. I'm just going to ask Trace, can you close that door? So, yeah. So we have a chance to read it, and we're going to read it like we do other books, which is that we take turns reading it. So I'm going to ask people that if they want to share a little bit of the reading of this amongst each other. And I will tell you this, for those who have been here before, I will ask you maybe to consider reading this in a way that you may not have read it before, which is, and for those, I guess, who haven't been here before, you're going to hear this now, and you're going to hear what I'm going to tell you. There is a chance that this book, that this story, was actually intended initially to be a parody, to be satire, to be actually humorous. People have a hard time with that because it bothers them, this idea that a part of the Bible could be funny. There are other funny parts of the Bible. There are puns, there are intentional, there are times where we are supposed to laugh. But the idea that a book of the Bible would be written from start to finish that way is a little hard for some people to comprehend. Now, I say start to finish. There might be a part of this that isn't intended to be parody. But when we think about satire and we think about parody, we usually think of, we oftentimes think of things that are silly or light. But in reality, parody and satire is a very high form of comment and of criticism. And we have to remember that in order to understand satire, you have to understand what it is that people are satirizing. They have to understand the context, and you have to understand the original text. If you don't, sometimes you can miss that it is even satire. So for us, the example would be if I'm watching a show, a Korean or Japanese show, and I just tune it on, and I don't understand the language, and I don't exactly understand what's happening. If I'm watching it, I might think that this is like a serious documentary or a serious fictional, a representation of a historical event. And I might not realize that the whole thing is meant to be a parody, is meant to be a spoof on this, and I just don't understand the context. I don't get it. And it's possible that people, even though they understood Hebrew, and even though Jonah appears to be a later form of Hebrew, meaning that, again, when we look at biblical texts and try to figure out how old they are, we sometimes do it by the language and by the words that are used. It is very possible that Jonah is a fairly late book in the Bible, that when we look at it, we don't understand that the original intention of it was meant to be a parody, was meant to be satire. Now, again, you're going to say, well, now that I think about it, yeah, that is kind of funny. But to understand that in a way takes away some of the ways that people have read it. Now, it's not always the case, because there's very old commentary that Jonah is a dream, that did not actually happen to Jonah, that Jonah dreamt it, which is, by the way, another way that maybe we would read it today, which is with this sense of understanding it as a dream, with symbolism and with representation. But the rabbis realize that there's parts of this text that it's not just because of what happens in the text, but there seems to be a sense in this that this couldn't possibly have happened, literally. And so this is something to consider as we read it. Again, I'm not saying if this is the first time you've read it, I don't want to tell you that this is a joke. That's not what I'm saying. It is actually a very high form of criticism and commentary when you read something that's a parody. And you think about some of the great satire and some of the great criticisms over the years, whether it was something like Charlie Chaplin. If you didn't understand the context of Hitler and didn't understand Nazi Germany, you wouldn't really understand the full. What would you understand of the great dictator if you didn't understand that? So kind of keep that in mind as we read this, because that might be a way to read it. And not that it'll give you any necessarily it might not go down any better, but keep that in mind as we read it. And then think about maybe why there would have been a parody. So we'll see what happens. And I don't know where Joyce went, but Joyce was telling me she just read this too. I wanted to hear she read it in a different community back in Denver. I was interested to hear what she has to say. So when she comes back. So do we have a volunteer who would like to start us on the book of Jonah in the first chapter? Anybody dare to begin the beginning? In English, yeah, with what we have right here. I'm not going to make anybody. If you know it from the Hebrew, that's very impressive. But I'm not going to ask anybody to do it. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
From here?
From the Word. From the Word.
Okay, the book of Jonah. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go up at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me.
Yep. So that's the opening to the book. That's what we know about Jonah, that he is the son of a man named Amittai, and that he is supposed to go up to the city of Nineveh, which is the capital of the Assyrians. What we know about this story that's factual is that there was a man named Jonah. We actually have him referred to in the book of Kings, so we know he actually exists. And we also know that Nineveh was in fact a real city, that it was a city, and we've uncovered a lot of the archaeology from Nineveh. British archaeologists 150 years ago excavated Nineveh and gave us a great deal of knowledge about the city during the Assyrian period. But that's all we know. The fact that he's told to go proclaim judgment upon it, that we don't have record of. The idea that Jonah, who was a real prophet, who is mentioned in the Bible, was ever told to go to Nineveh, we don't know that happened. We don't have any attestation of that anywhere else in the Bible. It's not very common for prophets, though not impossible, for them to be told to go to another place that's not Israel. There are cases of prophets, Hebrew prophets, that went to other kings, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility. But to actually go to another city and to go actually speak to a whole other nation, that's not common. This would be the only place that we actually have a Jewish prophet, a prophet from Israel, going to another city. So maybe, as I said before, maybe from the very beginning, we're supposed to see this story as maybe something that is a parody of a situation that wouldn't likely have happened. That could be the first indicator. So again, a lot of times people say, well, you're talking about the fish, that part? Not really. The very first part of this already seems to be meant to be somewhat maybe of an implausibility. But that's what we got. So let's keep going.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to assume that he started this when God came to him? He's in Israel.
Yeah, we'll know that from the next part. But
Nineveh?
so Nineveh is in modern day Assyria, ancient Assyria, the capital of ancient Assyria, but in modern day Iraq. So it's not Syria, it's Assyria, and it was the first great empire of the world, in the sense that like they were the first country that ever conquered other countries just to conquer other countries. So then you had the Babylonians, and then you had the Persians, and then you had the Greeks and the Romans. But the first people that really put together an empire are these people, the Assyrians based in Nineveh. So this was a real people. Now again, the Egyptians did things similar, but pretty much in a fairly small region. The Assyrians were the first people that raised an army that was pretty substantial to go after. And eventually, by the way, the Assyrians do go to war against the Egyptians and are able to even go into Egypt. The Assyrians were that powerful. So we'll see. We'll see where Jonah's from. Keep going. Yeah, keep going.
Jonah, however, started out to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's service. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went aboard to sail with the others to Tarshish, away from the service of the Lord.
Yep. And so for those who've talked about, and we've talked about this before, Tarshish is where he decides he's going to go, which is the opposite end of the world from Nineveh. So he's going in the opposite direction. And again, if you think about this as a parody, he doesn't stay in town. He does leave, and he goes the very opposite direction from there. And again, we can see, and we've pointed out before in previous years, that God keeps telling him to go up, and he keeps going down. He goes down to Jaffa, which is geographically south for him. He's trying to go down to Tarshish, which is, again, further off in the other direction, maybe a southerly and westernly direction instead of a northern easternly direction. So, well, not maybe, I mean, that is for him. So he's going in the opposite direction. And again, the possibility that we've talked about before, that he actually pays the entire fare. He doesn't pay his fare, he pays the entire fare to charter the ship and to get in the other direction. So he doesn't just pay to go on the ship. He pays for the ship to go, which also on a prophet's budget is probably a prophet's salary is difficult to do. But he is so anxious to get away, which again is meant to be humorous. We're meant to say, really? He had that kind of money? Yes, Philip.
Well, this is part of the, would be almost parody for me. Where does he think he's going? How do you get away from God? I mean, it's almost mythology, like, oh, if I'm running from the Lord, really? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So this is another aspect of the silliness of this. So again, we can look at it as tragedy, which we kind of have before, but it's also very possible that we're meant to laugh at what Jonah tries to do, which is, again, go in the opposite direction. And again, as you point out, Philip, how do you get away from God? Where does he think he's going to be able to get away from God? So as those first couple of, and again, we'd be about halfway through, a quarter of the way through the first chapter. Let's keep going on. If you read another paragraph for us. Yeah, read another, if you want to read another one. Oh, yeah, sorry.
There's 3 sentences,
Yeah.
and in each sentence they say Tarshish 3 times. It almost seems like, you know, when you're talking to a friend and they're trying to tell you the story and they want you to believe it, and they just keep repeating these specific details over and over.
Yeah.
Because they somehow make it, like, it makes it seem more believable.
Yeah, that's true too. The repetition that goes on here is also meant to be funny, I think, and again, other people have pointed out too. It's one of the staples of humor from the earliest, again, possibly from the earliest forms of writing, the repetition. And again, that's part of what makes things funny, is people going back and forth. I mean, that's Abbott and Costello, who's on first. You know, that part of what makes that funny is the repetition of it. If you just said it once, it's not funny. It's that he keeps saying it. And again, that's the repetition is a big key to it. You're absolutely right. Saying, oh, I said Tarshish. Oh, really? You're going to Tarshish? Yeah, it is part of the way of emphasizing, but almost again to a ridiculous level of where we're going. Yep. Yes.
Why do you, I mean, supposing it was, another ship just happened to be one movement at the time, so he didn't pick this one randomly, he definitely picked it, especially if he chartered it, I mean, it's reckoning to go there. Did he pick it because he thought it was a place that was going to be least likely to be found, if that was at all possible, or just because it happened to be in the opposite direction? I mean, why Tarshish instead of, 20 other destinations?
Well, some people pointed out because it's literally, like, geographically the other end of the world. So it is going the opposite direction. So he's supposed to go northeast to go southwest. So that's the possibility. Because we're actually not even sure which Tarshish they're talking about. It's either Tarsus, which is in modern day Turkey, but which was a big city in Asia Minor. It's where Saul, and later St. Paul, was from that city. Or it's from Tartessus, which is all the way in Spain, which was a Phoenician port in those days and would have literally been the other end of the world. It's modern day Cadiz in Spain, and it's literally the end of Europe. So it's at the end of the Mediterranean. So it's possible that it's that. I mean, most people think that that's where he said he was trying to go, which is literally off the map. That's another area of this, which again, if we understand the geography of those days, it's not just going the opposite direction, it's going to the other end of the world from that place and almost trying to get away from the known universe. So it'd be almost like going to another planet today. It's like you say, I'm going to take off in a rocket ship to get away from God. I'm going into space and I'll get away from God there. Yeah. Any other points? But yes. Yeah.
But it doesn't say the reason he wants to go away. Is the reason is because he doesn't want to be a prophet anymore? So in Tarshish, he's not a prophet.
He doesn't want to go
And
to
then also maybe he's so scared, he doesn't think there's going to be divine protection when he tells them how wicked they are. He's scared of that, of their wickedness.
Those are all absolutely possibilities of what motivates him to get out of Israel, to be outdone with being a prophet. to going in the opposite direction, to trying to get away. All those are possibilities, absolutely.
I was gonna say, he got tired of God calling on him all the time.
And if he
Because
thinks
you know
that
what I'm
maybe
doing.
being outside of the land of Israel. On the other hand, the only problem with that theory, though, is that he's supposed to go to Nineveh, which is also not in the land of Israel and would also put him outside the land of Israel, and God's already told him, I'm sending you there. So sending him outside the land of Israel doesn't seem to be the problem.
I think
But-
he just doesn't want to go tell someone you're bad.
Yeah, and especially,
Right.
especially
You're evil.
after we talk about the context of this, as we've said in the past, we'll remind people, the people from Nineveh, the Assyrians, destroyed his homeland. Those people will be the people who end up destroying the northern kingdom of Israel. So these are people that we do not want to save. These are people, this is literally like telling somebody at the eve of, the Nazis coming to power in 1933, you got to go tell them not to be, not so bad. And they were like, but they're going to, So when people read this story, they knew that context, which again is maybe also, to use the analogy of the great dictator, to laugh at that, actually while it's happening, by the way, is even more difficult. But Jonah was probably written a good amount of years after the destruction of the northern kingdom, which everybody knew. So it's not like this wasn't a known factor, too. Kind of keep that in mind. No, we know it no matter what. The people who included this in the Bible, no matter what, knew that. So they knew who the Assyrians were. They were the first version of, the Egyptians were the first version of people trying to, an anti-Semitic genocidal nation trying to destroy the Jews. The Egyptians are first, but the Assyrians are the next.
May I say something?
Yeah.
It sounds like he had the vision of a prophet, but he didn't have the courage to deliver.
Maybe. Yeah, and
Or
again,
he didn't have the wisdom and the courage to deliver that message.
and he definitely doesn't want to do it. All right, keep reading.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay, but the Lord cast a mighty wind upon the sea, and such a tempest came upon the sea that the ship was in danger of breaking up. In their fright, the sailors cried out, each to his own god, and they flung the ship's cargo overboard to make it lighter for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the vessel, where he lay down and fell asleep. The captain went over to him and cried, how can you be sleeping so soundly? Up, call upon your God. Perhaps the God will be kind to us, and we will not perish.
Yeah, and so this is also, again, in the context of something that might be a parody or satire, the people, the crew is going nuts. They're watching this stuff happen. And the assumption, by the way, is that this is not the crew of the SS Minnow on Gilligan's Island. This is a crew which is seems to be. By the way, there doesn't seem to be any other passengers on the ship, which kind of again leads credence to the fact that this is not a passenger ship. It's either a cargo ship or a ship that he paid and didn't want to wait for everyone else to get on the ship. Because as we talked about before, in those days, you didn't buy a ticket from your travel agent. You went to the port, saw who was sailing out, and you waited until everyone got onto that ship. And it could take weeks for there to be enough people to get on a ship to go. So you had to sit in that town, wait for the passengers to come before you left. So if he chartered the ship and now he's the only passenger, well, look, the crew is doing their job, but he's does not seem to care. And as we've talked about many of the possibilities, that he's suicidal, that he's depressed, but this other image of everyone going nuts and him going down to sleep is, again, possibly humorous. And again, another level of the parody of this, which is that, again, the captain of the ship says, get up. The same words that God said to him, Kum, get up, call on your God, which is, again, going back to God, which, of course, is not what Jonah wants to do. But they're looking for anything. At this point, again, the sailors are praying it says each to their own God, which again is the key, is telling us these are not Jews. This guy does not seem to have any idea what Jonah is about. Yeah, someone's going to say something. No?
I was gonna say, when they said we're each to his own God, so they definitely were not the same God that Jonah was.
Yep. And at this point, they don't even seem to know Jonah is Hebrew, is a Jew. And we're going to know right now. Does someone want to continue?
Could be getting C-section.
Yeah.
The movies are on a television set where he's up on the deck and he decides to go down. Everybody's hauling stuff out of the hole, and he's going down to go to sleep. And that would be a whole satire
In itself.
of
Yeah, people running around on the
people
top.
running around crazy trying to, and the crew going nuts doing it, and the captain yelling, what's going on? What's going on? Move that stuff! And what are you doing sleeping there? And it would be a very laughable.
Yep. And the fact is it seems by the setup of this that Jonah was watching that happen as he goes down. So it says it says first that they do that and then he goes down. It says meanwhile, but again, as that's happening, he's going down. So it's not like he's doing anything. It's not like he's doing anything while that's happening. And again, he watches it happen to some extent before he goes down and goes to sleep. Yeah.
Well, yeah, when you think about it, it's like one of those stories about the butterfly effect. There's a whole chain of events. I mean, if this ship had sunk, then Nineveh never would have been warned, would have been destroyed, and would have affected a whole bunch of things later on. So it's like, just one of these things in this parable, if it hadn't happened, things would have turned out completely different.
Yeah, that is there is that sense at the end of the story that's the way things are connected, and that each of us have to do our part in that chain. But again, it's another possibility too. Do we have someone who wants to continue? Yes.
The men said to one another, "Let us cast lots and find out on whose account this misfortune has come upon us." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. They said to him, "Tell us, you who have brought this misfortune upon us, what is your business? Where have you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" "I am a Hebrew," he replied. "I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made both sea and land." The men were greatly terrified, and they asked him, "What have you done?" And when the men learned that he was fleeing from the service of the Lord, for so he told them, they said to him, "What must we do to make the sea calm around us?" For the sea was growing more and more stormy. He answered, "Heave me overboard, and the sea will calm down for you. For I know that this terrible storm came upon you on my account." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to regain the shore, but they could not, for the sea was growing more and more stormy about them. Then they cried out to the Lord, "O please, Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life. Do not hold us guilty of killing an innocent person. For you, O Lord, by your will have brought this about." And they heaved Jonah overboard, and the sea stopped raging.
Right. And so this is the critical scene where Jonah gets thrown overboard, which he seems to be more than okay with. He actually tells them to do it. And, of course, it maybe is humorous that they don't want to do it. Like they would even think twice about doing it. Because we're supposed to assume that these are pretty tough guys, that these are sailors and guys who would not think twice about throwing a guy overboard for nothing, let alone when he's told them to throw them overboard. So
They don't have their own God, right? But now they're praying to his God. So are they converted?
yeah, well, you got to read the next line. But yes, according to our sages, well, why don't you read the next line?
The men feared the Lord greatly. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows.
Yeah, so according to tradition, those guys rode. They went back to Israel. They went back to Jaffa after that, and all became Jews. They gave up their lives of piratry, sailors, being rough sailors, being outlaws, being out on the ships, whatever you want to call it. And they all become students of Torah and become our ancestors. So according to tradition, these people are our ancestors too. They're early converts.
Oh, sure.
They early converts to Judaism. But the Bible says that that's what they did. So again, are we meant to take this? This is another level of, are we supposed to really think that these guys had a conversion? Now look, they just survived a near-death experience, which will make people religious. But again, this is part of the level. They're not left behind. I mean, that's one of the weird things about it, is that they're still part of the story by telling us what happens. That sentence actually tells us that they are part of the story, that they're not just characters. And by the way, this is where we get to the point of the parody, that maybe the point was telling us we cannot forget about our Gentile neighbors. I mean, that is actually, many people feel that that's actually the giveaway for what the parody is actually about. That this is about making sure that we don't become the types of people that are only concerned with ourselves. That's maybe why we have that little line there. But again, on this part of the text, which tells us that they definitely didn't want to be responsible for it. They do everything they can. They, of course, ask Jonah, and Jonah tells them who he is, which would then, again, give them an idea of who they're... If we're trying to establish deities and whose God works, etc., this is how he tells them about it. And again, he's basically telling him, I worship the God who makes everything, which is not what, of course, they would have believed in. Assumedly, they would have believed, these guys in particular would have been more likely to pray to their ocean gods, Poseidon, or whatever, many gods that these people would have come from their background. By the end of this, their part of the story, they've become Jews.
That makes sense, though. I mean, they throw Jonah overboard, and all of a sudden the sea's calm. So it's like Jonah was right.
Yeah.
My God's better than your God.
Yeah, and so this on one hand proves it, right? So they have proof, but again, this idea. So the point is if they just survived, then that doesn't really help. I mean, it could have ended that way, and that's the point. But it doesn't. And the fact that it says that they feared God greatly and that it became, if not Jews, that they worshiped at this moment as Jewish people, is, again, why that
But
one little
what
line
does
might
it
be
make
critical.
sense, Rabbi, actually, is they sacrifice to the Lord. What did they sacrifice? Themselves?
No. Assumedly, so here's what they, the commentator said. They row back to Jaffa. They go back to Jaffa at Tel Aviv. They get on a horse or walk. They go up to Jerusalem and they offer up sacrifices in Jerusalem. That also, to some extent, means that they took it, and that's what the text tells us, that they took it upon themselves to do it, which again means that you actually have to do something after you've had an experience like that. But this idea that this is what they do, so it doesn't really say how they did it and how they got there. I just made up that part, but that's what logically would have happened. But if we're filming this, the next scene after everything gets calm is that these guys are all sitting around in Jerusalem and just made a sacrifice. So that's the cut to. Now again, you could do that in a movie, and people would say, well, they assumedly they figure out. It only works if you know, well, a few things, but still, however you're going to show that, you could show that today, which is, people sitting in a synagogue or whatever. However you do that, remember, you can establish things with one shot, with one quick shot. I tell people this all the time. If you want to establish that someone's Jewish or that they're, like, I've seen it done. You've seen it done. If you're watching a movie and there's a Jewish wedding and all you have to have is a breaking glass, you don't have to have anything else. See a guy stepping on a glass, that's 1 second, and it's a Jewish wedding. The guy's Jewish. I've seen it in a Ben Stiller. I saw it in a Ben Stiller movie. I've seen it in a bunch of movies where I saw it in. I want to tell you all the movies I've seen it in, because some of the movies are be like, yeah, that's pretty wild. But no, there's that's all you have to show. So they show a scene and that's it. That one shot. That's not a scene. It's a shot. So.
Because Jonah, God tells Jonah to do one thing, and Jonah does everything he can to get as far away as possible, versus Jonah says one thing to these guys and they're falling over themselves to follow direction, and they completely change their entire lives after.
Yes, which is also meant to be maybe humorous, because the other way that you could film this if you were doing it today is that the next scene, and you'd have to be able to do it, in a way that you'd be able to capture this, but it would be literally like, picture the roughest looking Hell's Angels type people, right?
Getting laser
And
surgery,
and then the
getting
next
tattoos
scene
off,
is you see them with,
girls.
what?
Getting their tattoos removed.
They not even have to have their tattoos removed. They're wearing black. They're wearing black hats. Yeah, exactly. They're wearing black hats, and they now have payas. You see the next scene. That's what we just saw. That's what just happened in that. Is
That is funny.
that was what just happened. So when you think about that juxtaposition, it's meant to at least, I don't know, make you laugh, but you're definitely supposed to be powerful. All right. Do you want to keep going? Thanks.
The Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. Three. Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. He said,
Okay, so that's the end. So that's the end of chapter 1, and then we'll have you read, believe it or not, this is chapter 2, this paragraph. So this is the prayer, the poem, the song, the call of Jonah, which again might have been the original piece of this, where the rest of the narrative was written around this piece. So this doesn't seem to be funny. There doesn't seem to be anything funny about this. And by the way, if you think that someone can't take something that's serious and then write a funny thing around it, there are a lot of people who've done that over the years. By the way, and I want to tell you this, this is not this is an issue even from the beginning of English literature. I mean, people have commented about things that Shakespeare has written. Is that supposed to be funny? Is that supposed to be humorous? Or is that supposed to be serious? People do that all the time with Shakespeare. But even more so, like the first great English writer, Chaucer, I mean, there's big debates amongst English scholars whether Chaucer is making fun of these people that he's writing about or whether he's, celebrating it. There's a very big difference because, by the way, the consequences of that tell us a lot about Chaucer and about what would have been acceptable. But, I mean, and some of it, by the way, is even anti-Semitic. But there is a question whether or not some of these things are supposed to be funny, whether they're supposed to be lampoon, or whether they're supposed to be serious. And it goes back to, again, the beginnings of English literature. So these are still big issues. It'll be interesting to see if some of the things that we thought were funny, whether people who uncover them later on or don't understand. I doubt it, because we tend to write so much about our stuff nowadays, and we classify it and we categorize it, right? So, if you open up a thing on Netflix or whatever, it'll say this is a comedy. But if you don't have that, or if some of the context, you always wonder, like, after the apocalypse, as people undercover and start to watch stuff out of context, that's like, in every, kind of science fiction movie, they're watching this stuff and they're like, they don't understand it and they want to understand what was the original context for these shows. Would people get it? And so this is a big issue. But this doesn't seem to be humorous. This doesn't seem to be part of the parody, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the stuff isn't. That's all I'm trying to say today. And again, it doesn't mean this is parody, but this part doesn't seem to be. This part seems to be pretty serious. Yep. Here we go.
In my trouble I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried out, and you heard my voice. You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the sea, and the floods engulfed me. All your breakers and billows swept over me. I thought I was driven away out of your sight. Would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? The waters closed over me, the deep engulfed me, the weeds entwined around my head. I sank to the base of the mountains. The bars of the earth closed upon me forever. Yet you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I called the Lord to my mind, and my prayer came before you unto your holy temple. They who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. But I, with loud thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will perform. Deliverance is the Lord's.
So this is the prayer of Jonah. This is chapter 2. So again, most people we don't usually comment that much on it because it's a poem, it's a prayer, it's seems pretty straightforward. But, and it's, it maybe gives us a little clue of who Jonah really was, because these are Jonah's words. This is the most we've heard from Jonah. And again, this is what he does inside the belly of the fish, which it doesn't necessarily seem that this is the prayer of somebody who's inside a fish, by the way. I will point that out. We've talked about that before.
Why is he talking about mountains and weeds?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. He seems to be talking about from the depths, right? But it doesn't, and we have other times in other places in the Bible where we talk about out of the depths. But, and he says from the belly of Sheol, which is another way of saying from the depths of hell. I mean, that's the way we'd say, or the depths of the underworld, from the depths of the netherworld, from the deepest, darkest place, but not necessarily from the belly of a fish. But anyways, when we look at this prayer, and again, it refers to the temple. So we do believe that this was written at a time when the first or second temple was in existence. So either before the Babylonian destruction or after the Babylonian destruction, once it had been rebuilt. There's no question it was written before the Roman period. So that's not a question. But whether it was written before the first temple was destroyed, we're not 100% sure, but it could be. But it definitely focuses on the temple. There's no question. It mentions that a couple times. It talks about sacrifice. It talks about doing what the sailors do at the temple by offering sacrifices. But what's interesting about this, and what you may not have noticed before as we've read this, is that Jonah says, I want to do this again. I want to be in the temple. I want to do what's right, which isn't really necessarily what prophets do anyways. Prophets go around telling people what to do and what God wants. This definitely seems to be more of just what everybody wants to do, but that's okay. But the key... What?
He wants to do over.
Yeah, he does. He does, which is why we oftentimes say this, we read this at Yom Kippur because of this, because this is somebody who says, I'll fulfill my vows, right? Which is what Kol Nidre is actually trying to help us get out of, those vows that we didn't perform. He says, I'll do what I said I'll do. I'll get that do-over, right? But notice what he says here when he says at the top of that page, they who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. Now, what's of course interesting about that line is, let's say Jonah did say that. Let's say this was a well-known prayer of Jonah. The whole rest of the parody here, folks, and I've never told you this before, the whole rest of the book of Jonah, the other 3 chapters, the 1 chapter before to the 2 chapters after, could be exactly trying to undermine that phrase. Not in a way that is against Judaism, not in a way that's anti-religious or anti-God, but actually showing us, really, is everybody who is worshiping idols forsaking their own welfare. Now, you could say, well, yeah, because the sailors almost die, and without ruining the story, that we're about to read chapter 3, the people of Nineveh almost die. They're clinging to empty folly. But look what happens to them. They're going to be okay. I mean, if given a chance, they'll be okay. Don't give up on these people. So what's interesting about this is that it actually undermines part of what Jonah's mentality, as we know, those who've read it, is, which is, I don't really care about those people. They cling to empty folly. That mentality is short-sighted, and it's not what God seems to want based on the rest of Jonah. So that line there actually might be the key to the rest of the book, and to understand where the parody and the satire really comes from. Because we have talked about this before. At every turn, it is the Gentile who is the hero of this story.
So when you
Every
said,
turn.
So when you said that part, that's the spiritual arrogance. In other words, them clinging to their own folly, like he's above them now, even though he's going through his surrender and willing to totally change everything again. You know, like you said, this is our second chance every Yom Kippur, which I believe is almost every day anyway, but that chance to surrender and change every day. But that attitude that I, know so much and I'm doing so great that I can be above anybody else, that spiritual arrogance, which is not what God wants us to be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Be humble, in other words.
And that this story actually is a parody, a satire to show people who have that arrogance. So again, at what level can this be read? Maybe, again, I'm only offering, because we haven't done it before. This is another offer for you to think about, is maybe we're meant to really take that seriously and do it by sometimes laughing at how stupid that mentality is when we think we're better than somebody else.
The Colbert Report. Because he would always take, it was a character that he played, that wasn't him. And he always took one thing every episode and threw it so far out there that it seemed ridiculous, to where everybody else can then look at that and go, oh, that is ridiculous.
So what you're talking about is the power of satire,
Yeah,
and how
that one line makes
and how it's
sense,
done.
that
Look,
makes this whole story
look,
different.
there is something to be said for the fact that people, and when he moved away from that, when he stopped doing that on his talk show, people were concerned about whether he could break that established form of satire. It is something that you recognize at the time. I think people who understand satire, it is a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard place to inhabit. People who've inhabited it, it's very hard to do. But it is oftentimes the most biting and effective form of doing it is by taking a humorous side. And I would say that it works when people don't have a sense of humility. It oftentimes works when the foil, the other side, is too serious. And that's why people who were made fun of by him or who didn't get it, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, when he would sit down and do, Better Know a District and talk to people who didn't really get what he was doing, and it would oftentimes be Democrats too who didn't get it. They would be told, he's going to be nice to you, but they didn't understand that didn't mean that he wasn't going to make fun of you, and they would get offended by what he would do to them, because again, they were not humble, they were arrogant, they were too into their power, and they couldn't play along with it. So it is an interesting thing. And again, I like Jonathan's language of spiritual arrogance, which again I know Jonathan brings to it an interesting take from his work for many years. Yeah.
It seems also to me, and maybe just kind of it's a theme or something that I'm kind of seeing maybe through the story, is there's, that doing the right thing and the wrong thing, isn't kind of a negotiation tool. It's like, okay, if I go ahead and do the right thing by going to Nineveh, everything's going to work out for me, and not only that, Nineveh is not going to hurt anybody else. Just going even back to the sailors, they didn't say, okay, if we save this guy, we'll sacrifice to you, and will you, make it right, and the storm will go away. They made the decision afterwards that they're going to be pious, or they're going to do the right thing, but not as a deal-making type of thing to save themselves. Because I think all throughout, and maybe it even goes kind of to that theme of the book, when bad things happen to good people, you don't do the right thing with the expectation that things are going to work out for you, and you don't do the wrong thing with the belief that if you do the wrong thing, you're going to be punished. That's not really the way the world works. And I think in the story I'm seeing that there's a trend that you need to be guided to do what's ethical and so forth, because it is the right thing, not as a way to get what you want or avoid someone else not getting what you want. Because it happens throughout the whole story. He doesn't want to do this. It's because he's saying, well, if you go ahead and save me in the fish, and then God didn't want to hear him say that. Well, I'll go ahead and do the right thing if you save me. Now he's going back and seeing, hey, God really did save him, and he's thankful for that, supposedly, but not in a way to say, okay, get me on the dry land and I'll do what I'm supposed to do.
I would say that's definitely a takeaway from it, especially when we get to the end. I think it's important to remember, because again, that was the point of why Kushner wrote that book, He talks about it. It's pretty powerful, and it's hard to read it as a rabbi. It's really hard to read it. It's hard to read it no matter what. And again, for those who don't remember the story, I mean, he writes it out of his dealing with his son's progeria and losing his son to a horrific disease. That's the disease where you age. It's just horrific. I saw, yeah, anyways. And he wrote that book, and he basically said, look, I'm a rabbi. I was doing everything so that, I thought God would give me good things, like why would God punish me? I'm doing all this stuff. So tough. It's a tough one to read if you're a rabbi, because you think somehow, hey, I'm doing these things, I'm helping out, I'm doing mitzvahs, that I'm going to be spared, sorrow and bad times. And it's really hard, because it is a reminder that you don't do things, we don't do the right things for that reason. We can't. Won't work that way. So yeah, it is a theme in question of whether Jonah really ever understands that. We have someone else who would like to read. Chapter 3 begins with this very funny scene, really. It's meant to be a funny scene, at least. Who wants to start chapter 3? Anybody? Any volunteers? Readers. Okay, thanks.
The Lord commanded the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it what I tell you. Jonah went at once to Nineveh in accordance with the Lord's command. Nineveh was an enormously large city, a 3 days' walk across. Jonah started out and made his way into the city the distance of 1 day's walk, proclaimed, 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown. Right.
And so part of the humor of this also might be the fact that there is no city in the ancient world that was 3 days walk across. Right. These were not real dimensions. It's not real. It's a satire. It's ridiculous. Now people go, well, it's 3 days to walk across. He walked in a day and a half into the city. There's not a city. I mean, even today in Beijing, you could walk across, and it's a big city. You could walk across that city in a couple of days, and you'd travel 30, 40 miles. There was no city in the ancient world like that. So
Three comes across a lot.
yeah. It's
3 there, 3 Tarshish.
Yeah, it's considered to be a symbolic number, right? It's a number of intention when we do something 3 times. And so, but again, it's a huge size. And again, what's funny about this story is that when we look at it in English, it says 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown, which in English is 8 words. In Hebrew, it's 5 words. And again, he delivers a 5-word pronouncement, and that's it. That's it. He gives 5 words. I'm going there, I'm saying 5 words, and then he walks out. And that is, again, meant to be funny. He goes in, says 5 words, and then leaves. And we're not even clear, by the way. He proclaims it, right? Who does he proclaim it to? Does he stand in the middle of the place? Does he say it on the top of a mountain? Whatever. He says it, and he leaves. I'm done. Doesn't say he said it more than once. Doesn't say he said it to anyone in particular. He proclaims it. He goes into he says, and then he could say, looks up to God, I'm done, and walk out. So
He did what God asked him.
he did it. I did what you said, God, and I left. And that's it. And literally, he could have said it to the wall. He could have turned around to the wall and said it and then walked out. But it doesn't matter because people heard it. Why don't you keep reading?
The people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and a great and small alike put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose with his throne, took off his robe, put on sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he had the word cried through Nineveh, by decree of the king and his nobles, no man or beast of flock or herd shall taste anything. They shall not graze, they shall not drink water, they shall be covered with sackcloth, man and beast, and shall cry mightily to the God. Let everyone turn back from his evil ways and from the injustice of which he is guilty. Who knows but that God may turn and relent? He may turn back from his wrath so that we do not perish.
Right. And so, however it happened, the king hears it, tells everybody to start fasting. By the way, it says the king of Nineveh. That also might be a clue that we're not supposed to take this literally, because the king of Nineveh was not the king of Nineveh. The king of Nineveh was the king of the Assyrian army, now the Assyrian people, the Assyrian Empire. The king, there was not a king of Nineveh. There was a king of the Assyrian Empire, and they would have said the king of that nation. Israel talks about other nations, Aram. They talk about the Chaldeans. They talk about the Egyptians. They don't say the king of Egypt is the king of, Luxor, or king of that city, of the king. Talk about the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. The king of Canaan, well, it wasn't one king, so that could have been where they would have even gotten that, because they did have city-states in Canaan. But, I mean, still, these are clearly meant to be, if not a parody, then they don't seem to know what Nineveh was really like. Yeah. Now, again, one of the clues that this might be a parody, of course, is that everything is covered in sackcloth. Everyone, including the beasts, are covered in sackcloth. Now, people say, was that real? Well, I don't know. It says it here. But if you're a literalist, you're literally stuck with this image of animals sitting in sackcloth.
And sackcloth is mentioned 3 times again.
Yeah. And so it's not like, did they mean to say that? I don't know. It said it 3 times. It said it over and over again, that including beasts. And the beasts are going to come out at the end too. So it's not like that was just thrown in there by accident. The word beast is at the very last word of the book. So let's keep that in mind. This isn't an accident. It was intentional. And
The other parody Rachel just pointed out is they said the animals didn't eat. How do you keep?
well, I mean, you and I can say we're not going to feed the cat or the dog today. I mean, it's pretty cruel to do, and they'd go nuts. They wouldn't just sit there, right? But the idea that you would also, on top of that, get them to wear sackcloth, especially when they're hungry, is meant.
They eat their sackcloth.
I know, it's not, yes. But seeing an animal sitting in sackcloth is again one of the clues, if not the biggest clue, that this might be a parody, because that animals could actually put on sackcloth is it's kind of hard to see, but you have to see it. You have to look at it. So the point is, they are in sackcloth, all those animals, and they're not eating.
I can see the king disrobing, putting on the sackcloth, being in ashes, and then sitting down in the ashes and proclaiming, go out and talk to the people and tell them we've got to, put on sackcloth on the animals and et cetera. Would be quite a scene.
Yeah, it's like you can't do this. You can't depict this without, literally, if you're going to depict it without laughing. You can't do it. I mean, you can read it not literally, but the point is that people are reading it literally, which was what they're doing by not reading it. The same people who would read this literally and say, well, this is exactly the way it happened, would be the same people who would have an issue with you saying that it's meant to be a parody, even though it's very possible that that was the intention of it. Now, again, look, we have to get out of our mindset of that there can be a book of the Bible that's meant to be humorous, or again, not humorous, but satire. So,
How many people, the Assyrians basically conquered anyone and everyone they could.
Yeah.
Them all come to their religion, but some dude walks,
Yeah.
a quarter mile into town, says 5 words, and everyone starts losing their stuff and changing everything, and now they're Jewish.
Yeah, that is, and we know, and again, we've never heard of anything like this happening in Assyria or any other kingdom. I mean, look, the Bible tells us the Egyptians let the Israelites go. doesn't tell us specifically that at the end of all those plagues and all those miracles that they said, you know what, let's be Jewish.
Yeah.
Which would have been like a natural thing after seeing all of their gods get destroyed. Let's be Jewish too. Now, it is possible that some of them did. And actually, there's kind of in the Midrash and the explanations there were Egyptians that said, you know what, we're gonna become Jewish. We're gonna be part of those people. And one of those people that we according to tradition we have that did that was Bithia, also known as Bat Paro, that she became a Hebrew. So, or when she adopted Moses, she actually will eventually become part of the Jewish people. So even in the movie, if you watch the Ten Commandments, she's there at the Passover Seder. I can't remember who it was now, but it was a big actress that played her. I can't remember. I don't know. I know Yvonne DiCarlo was in it, right? Yvonne DiCarlo was in that movie. It might have been Yvonne DiCarlo. She was one of the lead women. I think it might have been Yvonne DiCarlo, which was interesting because she was like the same age as the other actresses. Like, you know, the woman who played Sipporah was the same age too. But anyways, and I think she was pretty close to the same age as Charlton Heston. But she was his mom. I think it was his mom. I think you look it up. I think it was Yvonne DiCarlo. Anyway, she ended up becoming much more famous and something later on. That was a humorous thing, by the way, too, right? But she was a great actress. Anyway, so what we have here is we didn't actually read the kicker. Does someone else want to finish this up? Or at least the next couple paragraphs. Jonathan, yeah?
Okay, God saw what they did, how they were turning back from their evil ways, and God renounced the punishment He had planned to bring upon them and did not carry it out.
So again, God, it says that they did teshuvah, they turned back, which is teshuvah, that they turned back from their evil ways. And God renounced, God did teshuvah as well. God stopped the punishment, which means that God can change. God had a plan, and God changed that plan. The plan changed.
And that was the fall of the Assyrian Empire?
Well, not yet.
Away from their evil ways?
Yeah, well, maybe, but they go back to them. That's the other thing. It didn't last long because they will eventually destroy the northern part of Israel. Okay, keep going, Jonathan.
Okay.
Finish up.
This displeased Jonah greatly, and he was grieved. He prayed to the Lord, saying, O Lord, isn't this just what I said when I was still in my own country? That is why I fled beforehand to Tarshish. For I know that you are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, renouncing punishment. Please, Lord, take my life, for I would rather die than live. The Lord replied, Are you that deeply grieved?
Yeah, and so there's the part that we oftentimes talk about Jonah being suicidal, because he actually says right there. When he goes into the ship, seems suicidal. Here he says flat out, I'd rather die. And it's what he says, is I always knew you were going to do this, and so I didn't want to be part of your plan. I didn't want to be part of your plan. Which, again, looking at it from the view of satire is even funnier, because he says, I knew what you were going to do, God, and the joke's really on you because I didn't want to do it, and so, you made me do it, but, this is what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to save these people. I wanted these people destroyed. So he puts it back on God. And he, of course, says to God the famous words, Adonai, Adonai, el-Rachum v'chanan, that God, you're abounding in kindness and you renounce punishment. You do all these things. So I knew you were going to do that, and I didn't want to be part of this.
Yeah, and he's feeling real embarrassed, right? I mean, I get the feeling he feels like he's looking bad to everybody.
Looking back,
The wrath that was going to come upon that area did not come down because God turned back.
yeah, but he wants it to.
Yeah, he wants it to, and so he doesn't get his way, so he feels embarrassed and he's upset. I don't know.
Well, he's definitely not happy. He's so happy he doesn't want to live at this point.
Right, but why is that? Because he feels like, again, it's all about him.
Yep, it's still all about him. You're absolutely right. It's still all about him. I would rather be dead. It's about me. It's about
Ego and pride?
It's about himself.
Yeah.
When I was in my own country, the phrase, it's there in English even more than you notice it in Hebrew too if you're reading in Hebrew, but every time he says the word I in that, it's quite a few times. I or my. By the way, he says my life, he takes my life, which again, there's a certain audacity to that given the fact that his life is a gift from God too, which is something interesting. When you're speaking to God, the creator of your life and every other life, that I would rather, again, he's not speaking this out to the air, he's speaking it to God. God's talking to him. He's having a conversation with God right now. I mean, it says that because God replies. So he has a conversation with God. This isn't just in his imagination. If we read the text literally, he says to God, I don't want the life you gave me, which he doesn't say you gave it to me. He says, I don't want my life. Yep.
Because he's not admitting his life is not his own.
Well, he also, again, it's more important what he wants, not what God wants. He wants what he wants, and it's not what God wants. And again,
Feeling useless. Like, I knew you were going to do this anyways. I didn't want to do it because it was going to happen regardless of what I did. So I didn't need to be a part of it because it was going to happen anyways.
yeah, there's something amazing about it though, because most of us, like, if you were told, I'm going to be able to know what God wants. I know what God's going to tell me what to do. I'll know what I'm doing, which means like, I won't be wondering, am I doing the right thing? Is this my calling? Is this what I'm really supposed to be doing? Is this supposed to be what I'm doing with my life? God's telling him what he's supposed to do with his life. Literally telling you, I want you to do this. Pretty specific. Like that's the ultimate, I mean, not for necessarily everybody, but I sure would love God to tell me exactly what to do. Occasionally, just once, to be told exactly what to do. And this is giving him no comfort. Which again, if that's not the ultimate level of satire parody, think about it, because when you and I say that, and again, you may not have said it, but I've said it many times, I wish God would tell me what to do.
You don't think God does? I think he doesn't.
Maybe. I mean, I guess there's times when I think I'm doing what God wants me to do, but God never replied and said, really? Are you not sure? I mean, if God did that, I'd feel a whole lot better. I mean, I think I would. I'd hope I would.
Yeah,
then I would at least know it's not my mind telling me that. What?
I think, we know right from wrong, and there are times I think God's telling us to do what's right, and we kind of go against it. And, it's like...
Of course, I definitely know what you're talking about. I think all of us do. But that's different than saying, God literally told me what to do. And you're going, yeah, God, I know you told me what to do, and I didn't want to do it because I don't want that to happen. So that's kind of crazy, because you're saying, you step back for a second, but that's what God wanted you to do. That's what God wanted to have happen. God actually wanted that to happen, and you didn't want it to happen, which was more important. So the level of what this actually forces us to see is something that's so beyond like the story of a fish swallowing a person, is that when God would actually tell you what to do, would you want to do it? Would you really want God to tell you what to do?
I mean, it could be like a test too, like the binding of Isaac. God told him to go do this, and it's like he didn't want to really kill his kid, but he didn't. But he probably would have if.
Yeah, somebody else said. Yeah, somebody over here said something.
Can I say
Well, yeah.
something? First of all, it seems to me that this is a story for children, like an anecdote of the way because it doesn't seem to be real.
Well, it's definitely not a story. I'll tell you this: it's definitely not a story for children. Because I will tell you, if you really read what just happened, which I don't think I was ever told as a kid. Like I was told the story of Jonah not wanting to do the mission, and he did this, and he went the other way. And I remember the ship, and I remember but I don't ever remember being told, God, I want to die. I don't remember any teacher having the guts to say that to a kid. Oh yeah, he's suicidal. I don't ever remember that as a kid. So this is not really a story that I think like we teach children this story. You're right. We always teach them this story. This story and the Noah story, which by the way is also not a kid's story. It's a nightmare story. It's a nightmare. And we literally look at these stories as kids, and sometimes we stop reading them, which is why it's such a tragedy that people stop reading the Bible when they go to Sunday school, because they don't realize what they're actually being hit with, which is these ultimate truths of, again, why bad things happen or when bad things happen, or again, what happens if God really tells you what to do. Do you really want God to tell you what to do? Because the Bible seems to tell us it's not so easy. It's not so easy when God tells you what to do. And at least for this guy, this one guy who we don't know, like we all assume that Jonah's kind of like a mean guy, a bad guy, whatever. We don't know anything like that. I mean, all we know from the Bible is that Jonah is a prophet, does what God wants to do normally, and is a holy person, is almost maybe even according to the Midrash from birth raised to be a prophet. And yet this is a guy who, as the last words we just read, I don't want to do your work, God. I would rather die. So let's finish up. Who would like to finish up chapter 4? Don, finish up.
I was just thinking of that line, where Lord replied, "You got deeply grieved," and I kind of read it as, "Come on, Jonah, grow up. Things don't always go the way you want. So just because the outcome wasn't the way you expected it, you that upset." So I don't know. That was my interpretation.
It is, but it also, if you read it as a parody, then it is also God saying, "Really, Jonah? Really?" Like God laughing at him, "Really, Jonah?" Yeah. Because the next scene is actually then set up as what we kind of talked about before, which is the lesson in the story. Because there is a lesson in the story, and you actually brought it up, of consequences.
So now Jonah had left the city and found a place east of the city. He made a booth there and sat under it in the shade until he should see what happened to the city. The Lord God provided a gourd which grew up over Jonah to provide shade for his head and save him from discomfort. Jonah was very happy about the plant, but the next day at dawn, God provided a worm which attacked the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a sultry east wind. The sun beat down on Jonah's head and he became faint. He begged for death, saying, "I would rather die than live." Then God said to Jonah, "Are you so deeply grieved about the plant?" "Yes," he replied, "so deeply that I want to die."
Why don't you finish up and then we'll go back to it all.
Then the Lord said, "You cared about the plant which you did not work for and which you did not grow, which appeared overnight and perished overnight. And should not I care about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not yet know their right hand from their left, and many beasts as well?"
That's the last word. That's the last word. A lot of animals. There's a lot of animals there too. I mean, literally, you can't read that without laughing and saying that's the last word of the book. And again, the translation here ends with an exclamation. It could also be a question mark, a rhetorical question mark, but one that is also ends in a question. So going back to your point of consequences, that's definitely there, right? Because the gourd growing up and then withering, right? That's the consequences, right? That's where you see the butterfly effect that you talked about, how one thing happens, and he actually sees it happen in a quick, again, like it's somewhat funny that he sees this all happen in a day, that he sees that happen. But do you have any other comments now on that, now that you read that part? Because that actually is, again, a proof of what you said, which is to think about the effect that one person has on lots of other people, or what one thing can mean to create an effect.
Just other than, as you point out, I mean, Jonah's thinking so much of himself. That's kind of the big picture for him in the world. He needs to, what God's saying is, hey, you're just, as important as you are, being alive, you're just one part of, the whole big picture, and it's not all about you. And that got him, that's the way Jonah seemed to be seeing it when he was stressed. Hey, this is just me, and just the way I'm seeing it.
And again, for those who are watching right now from home, as Don just said, I just want to repeat it out loud so you can hear, that again, this is part of obviously the lessons for this holiday, which is why we read this at this holiday, is are we going to live our lives like that? Back to this idea of this. Oh, by the way, we like to point out too that he makes a sukkah. He builds a sukkah, which is another reason why we read this at this time. And God provides the gourd. God provides the decoration. We're supposed to build a sukkah and fill it with gourds and with fruit and all kinds of stuff. We're supposed to put up in the sukkah. So Jonah makes the sukkah, and God actually decorates the sukkah for him, which is, if not funny, it's definitely a kind of a amazing image that God, finishes off his sukkah for him. But of course, it doesn't go Jonah's way. And Jonah, once again, is not happy with the way things are going, which is, again, one of the lessons of Sukkot in Jewish tradition, which is definitely affirmed at Sukkot. We build a sukkah that can get blown over because, we live in a world that is a lot more precarious and is a lot more uncertain than we like to think it is. And we've been taught that lesson quite a few times recently. People who live on the East Coast have seen that happen in their own, in this last month, in these last days with the hurricanes that have hit, watching homes and businesses, buildings get knocked over. It's something we talk about, and it was in Rick's poem today. Those of us who live in California live with that. The longer we get away from it, the more we forget that it's always out there, that reality of an earthquake. And so we remind ourselves of that every year at Sukkot by building a sukkah that can get knocked over. It can't be completely attached to the building. It has to be able, if things don't go well, to come down with the elements. So Jonah gets it thrust right in his face how God cares about everything and everybody. And so Jonah cares more for a gourd. He cares more for this plant than he does for a whole city, which again is meant to call attention to this type of mentality, which might be what the satire is all about. Having the Jewish people remember that as much as we care for our community, we can't only care for our community, right? We can't have this separationist mentality, which basically looks at the rest of the world like you can go to hell. This is not. This is not what. I believe if this book is here for any reason, it's to teach us that. The question of whether it teaches us that through satire or through a literal, and if we want to sit here and not laugh about it, it teaches us that lesson too, because the last line of the book, the way the book ends, is with God affirming that I care about these people. Now again, what the 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left is an interesting question, which also gets to the historicity of it and whether we're supposed to take it literally. Because is it 120,000 people that live in Nineveh? If it's 120,000 people that live in Nineveh, that's like, well, these are people just don't know what to do, right or wrong. The other possibility is there's 120,000 kids or infants or young lives that don't know that. They haven't literally learned that. It can be read both ways. It's possible for it to be read either way, that it's 120,000 infants in the city or that it's 120,000 adults who really don't know any better. And if it's that latter, then it's also meant to be a little bit humorous, which is that God recognizes that most of us really don't know any better. And God recognizes that. God recognizes that we don't really know any better. And are we supposed to be granted a little leeway because of that? And you go back to that line at the top of the page of the other column where it says, those who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare. Is that really the case? I mean, or is it really the case that we hold people responsible for their ignorance? Do we hold people responsible for their lack of critical thinking? It's a big issue, folks, and I will tell you that it's one that is as relevant and maybe more relevant right now. Because for people who are laughing at people or who are demeaning people or are putting people down right now, you have to understand there are consequences to this, and it deeply divides our country right now. And I thought about that as I read the story this year and kind of prepared mentally for what to talk about here. You know, when we think about the people on the other side of the political aisle from us, or the family members that we disagree with, you know, if we don't treat them with a sense of compassion, then we're falling into the same trap that Jonah did, which is basically saying they can all go to hell. And there's too much of that thought right now. That's the question that I think we're really left with. It that is, after reading a very funny story, we're left with a kind of a chilling feeling, which is, what are you going to be? You know, are you going to be like Jonah this year? Are you going to be asked this question by God next year? Did you give people a chance? Did you literally write them off right away because of who they were, or what they believed, or what kind of hat they wore, or what kind of bumper sticker they had? Yes, Philip.
My question is from at the beginning, when God talks about their wickedness. What is the definition of wickedness? We don't really know what's going on in that city.
I will tell you, the word ra, which is used, I'm looking at the Hebrew, so just to make sure that when I say this that I'm not speaking out of turn. The word ra that is used there is the same word, it's the same word, it's wickedness, evil. It's the same word that's used in the rest of the story when Jonah's confronted by God. Let me rephrase that. When Jonah is not happy, at the top of the page, it's pretty wild when you think about this. And again, this is where, you know, you lose a little bit reading it in English, unfortunately. But let me just share with you this, since you brought it up, Philip. The Hebrew says, Vayira el Yonah ra'a gedolah. And it's not even like just a little ra'a, it's a lot. Ra'a gedolah means a lot of anger, a lot of wickedness. The word ra'a means just being on the wrong side of tov. It's also being wrong. It's wickedness, sometimes it's translated as wickedness. Ra is translated as wickedness. We have that phrase a lot at Yom Kippur, that we've done wrong. But ra also is translated here as, this displeased Jonah greatly, and he was grieved. So the feeling of being wronged is also there. The word ra is used there in the way that Jonah feels, which Jonah didn't do anything wicked, or maybe he did by what we're supposed to step away from, but that's not the word that's used here. That's why the word is translated that way. The word ra there is translated as displeased. So the same word was used in the sense that God was displeased with the people of Nineveh. So the word ra is used there, and it's used there as well. So it's interesting that word is actually the word that is used in both places, which teaches us again that the beauty of Hebrew is in its simplicity, and also again the way biblical Hebrew employs it with the repetition. We miss it sometimes, especially with the directional words that we have here. Some of the repetition of the words that you guys pointed out too. The repetition of Tarshish or some of these other words that you definitely see. But the word ra is translated so many different ways in this book that you will miss it. Same with kum, where God says kum, get up, and then the captain says it too to him, kum. Where it says there, up, call, and then it said go up at once. The word is the same word in Hebrew. It's almost the same. It says go up versus, but again, the Hebrew word there is very powerful. Thanks for pointing that out, Philip. That's an interesting thing that I probably I haven't seen before, is the fact that Jonah feels Jonah feels that God has wronged him. Because it says, Vayara el Yonah, Ra'a Gadolah. That is his, and he's mad that Jonah feels wronged by God. It's the same word.
That sounds like it's a why me thing. Why should I, why me? Why should I go? Send somebody else, don't send me.
Yeah. Definitely is a feeling in this, and I think, again, that's a good point, and it's one that Don was talking about too, about why me? You know, why do I have to do this? And again, that's what I'd posit is the real tough question in this story is, what if God did tell you what to do? Would it make it better? The Bible here seems to tell us it wouldn't. No, we don't know how old he is. We don't know what part of his life this takes place in. It doesn't tell us anything. What? Well, I would tell you probably not at this point.
I mean, it's
but
the stage of his life, you know what I mean? Because he seems very much like, I don't want to do it, I don't want to go, why do I have to do it? He gets overly angry about losing a gourd because it was his.
well, you're a lot closer to 15 or 16 than I am, but I will tell you, you will not stop saying that when you're in your 50s. Trust me, you might have said that.
Like, you know, God, you know, it's like your parents tell you to clean your room, so you shove everything in the closet and you clean your room. You know, God tells you to go to Nineveh.
You've only, by the way, you've only been married for a year too. So I will tell you that you're going to get that a lot. You're going to be married for a long time, I hope, and you will feel that all the time in marriage. That you will say, "Leave me alone." Maybe you won't. I don't know. Hope you don't, but that's the normal way it goes. So I promised you folks you'd see something new in Jonah that you hadn't seen before. Joyce, you were going to share something that you hadn't heard before. I want to hear, or that we haven't heard before. You had heard it before, but we hadn't.
There was a discussion about 3 days,
Yeah.
and,
Well,
earlier-
there were a lot of threes.
Exactly.
In the end,
Now,
he asked
actually,
for
the
death
beginning
times.
of this, that you don't have on this, but the chapter before this, where
Wait,
Jonah says.
what's the chapter before
Where
this?
Jonah says, because this starts with, you know, the word of God came to Jonah, but what we read last weekend was that Jonah said, well, I need to think about it, kind of thing, and he stayed away for 3 days.
That's not in the Bible.
Okay.
So that's probably a midrash based on the play on 3, but yeah, that's not. Jonah doesn't get a waiting period. Yeah.
But there was this whole discussion that we had around 3, and the series of 3s, and you see it throughout this whole session. I do the whole tractate. It's 3 days, 3 days.
Yep. Yep. And again, as we were saying, it's one of the ways to establish intention. Kavanah is by doing something 3 times. So that is the way to establish that is by doing it 3 times. We talk about it a lot. When we do certain mitzvahs, we do them 3 times. Like the tradition of placing, for example, earth at a cemetery, at the grave. We do it. Some people have a tradition of doing it 3 times to show our full kavanah in doing it. Washing our hands 3 times. There's ways of doing things repeated. You know, you don't have to do more than 3, but at least 3 shows that we're really doing it.
Jonah asked for death 3 times.
Well, you could say that he asks for death, or he doesn't ask for death the first time, but he essentially creates that situation when he goes into the hold of the ship. That's the first time. Then he says he wants to die, and then he says,
Over, I want to die.
"Oh yeah, that's well." He doesn't say I want to. He doesn't want to say I want to die. He doesn't want to say, but he does. Well, that would be 4. That would be 4 times. Then, if you're going to include the 2 times that he doesn't explicitly say it, but he forces God's hand. Though you could say the ship is the 1 time if you do goes into the hold and then tells him to throw him, and then the time that he says to God, "I wish you'd kill me," and then after the gourd dies, he says, "I wish you'd kill me." That would be the 3rd time. You could say that it definitely happens at least 3 times. where Jonah does something suicidal or asks for suicide.
He was
Yeah.
thinking he was doing the right thing when he told them to throw overboard, because he figured he would save them. It had nothing to do with dying.
You could definitely make that argument. So then the first time that he goes into the hold where the ship's falling apart, that could be the suicidal part of it. The phrase that's used there too when he goes to sleep is that he goes into almost like a coma when he goes in. It's not just he goes to sleep. He goes into a deep sleep, one that he doesn't seem to want to wake up out of. So that's a possibility. So thank you everybody for joining in our Jonah reading and discussion. I hope you have a chance during the coming year to be with us for Wednesday night. We're going to be reading Genesis like this, and we're going to have a chance to look at some of the stories of Genesis on Wednesday night at 7. And of course, we do that on Zoom. We're going to do it hopefully in this room as well, projecting the people who aren't here on the wall, having the discussion around the table, because we've had wonderful discussions over this last year when we've been on Zoom, including people from around the country. As a matter of fact, we had the Steins, where Jeff was with us a lot of times on our Tuesday morning, but we don't want to lose that. But at the same time, we do want to have people together. So sometime in the coming months, we're working on that with our great tech guy, Michael, in getting this up. I will tell you, if you were trying to watch today and you couldn't hear at the beginning, if you were watching from home, that was not Michael's fault. That was something that happened at the church today. And it's one of the reasons why we like to have our services under our control, because there are enough technical glitches that would be under our control, but when they're out of our control even more, like it was today, and not having the knowledge or the access or the fact that somebody reset the board last night, that is not fun. And so we definitely want to keep that down to a minimum. Again, relying on technology for services and for classes is always a little bit tough, but I will tell you, for the last 18 months, very few times, right, Mike? We've had a few times where it's glitched, but for the most part, usually, and almost always Wednesdays, not Tuesdays, sometimes my computer gets tired at the end of the night. And I've eliminated that by restarting it and giving it a little rest during the day. Yeah, because I'm realizing that I was asking my computer to do too much. I needed to have a little compassion on my computer. But even the computer needs to rest. So we're going to finish up right now with Ne'ilah, our last service of Yom Kippur and our last service of the High Holidays. And we're starting a little bit later than we normally do, about a half hour later, because it's still light out. And it doesn't get any, I will tell you, it doesn't get any earlier. It doesn't get light. It's not this late, whatever. What I'm trying to say is, usually we start earlier, and we will start earlier next year, because next year we'll be closer, we'll be about 3 weeks later, and we'll be closer to darkness about now. And again, it's the same 25 hours of fasting no matter what. We did start services, by the way, a half hour later because of that. Normally we start at 7:30. So we are gonna wrap up with, we're gonna wrap up tonight a little bit later. No, I don't want to see that yet. It's too early. All right, so we're going to make sure everybody, please grab a Moxor now. Please grab a prayer book from the entranceway, and also, again, take a moment to. You can also get a song sheet, but the song sheets today you won't need them too much. But we do need you to be present and to be part of the service tonight for Ne'ilah. Again, it's been wonderful having Rick and Addie with us over these holidays, to have them lead us in song and in prayer. And again, tonight we have people joining us, and we're on camera. I could ask Michael how many people are watching right now. Michael, how many people are watching right now?
Well, when I first looked, it was 3.
Yeah, there's this. You didn't want to know. I didn't want to know. Oh, that's on Facebook, by the way. So, by the way, we are streaming now on Facebook. We did not, because people paid for services, we did not put the services out for free, because they were, in the words of computer and internet commerce, these are monetized services. But we are tonight including people on Facebook and on streaming. So Yes, there's 3 people watching us on Facebook, but there are a lot more that are watching us on Vimeo right now. And we are glad that people were able to join us virtually. We got people who are part of our community who've moved to different places that were able to be part of our community, but it's not the same as, again, being able to be in person. We hope to be able to have more and more in our building, and Rick and Addie will be here, and they love singing in this room. They told me that. They said they love singing here because they can hear you singing. And Michael, there are 8 people watching on Facebook right now. So just want to tell you, we are going to get started and make this transfer from Jonah to Neela, and then to breaking a fast together. And so we're doing this in front of everyone, which is not also easy to do this transfer and to start like this together. We're going to begin with a song, a chant that is not in the Siddur, in the Machzor, not in our book, not in our page, but I'm going to turn it over to Rick and Addie to explain.
For some reason I want to say Shabbat Shalom, but I know that that's not what I should be saying now. We do like this room a lot. You're right, Rabbi. This is a sweet room. It's our home, right? You know, it's where most of you have spent a lot more time than we have, but our numbers are going up as the months go on. We like it here. We like the way it sounds here. We like the way it feels here. It's good to be with you. Especially on our hardest day. This is the hardest day, right? It started yesterday. It's hard. What we're asked to do, what we're asked to think about, what we're asked to refrain from, it's tough. And so to go through that with a group of people is something important to share. To open ourselves, to open our eyes, open our lips, open our hands, as we've sang a few times. This melody is on a song sheet. It comes from a lot of different places.
I think it was on Rosh Hashanah. I don't think it's on the song sheet from this week.
Oh, all right. Well, it's really easy. We can start out without the words. That'll make it really easy. It goes like this. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. It's good. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. So the first time I heard this, Craig Taubman was singing it. It's not his melody. He thinks it comes from a Native American source, and they were singing these Native American words. They were going, Kaute, Lena, Lena, Maute. Hayano, hayano, hayano. Kaute, Lena, Lena, Maute. Hayano, hayano, hayano. So you ask Craig, what does that mean after he sings it with you for a half an hour or so? And the basic answer is, I don't know. I don't know what that means. Just really like it. So we went back to ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la.
Ya la la, ya la la,
Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. So our friend Dan Nichols took that because it seemed like, well, this is really easy. I could probably sing this with groups. I could probably just get in front of people and do this. And just like you who've never heard this before, and now you're experts at this melody already. And he was singing it at a camp. Someone said, what does it mean? And he said, I don't know. I don't know what it means. But a woman, an Israeli who was working with him at camp, said, I hear Hebrew in this. I hear some Hebrew words that seem to make sense, and they are Kachuti Lean Lean Mahuti Chayenu 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 Kachuti Lean Lean Mahuti Chayenu Chayenu Chayenu. And Dan wasn't really sure what that meant either, so he went back to the Nigun and went Ya la la, 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 ya la la. So after they'd sang it for a while, they were trying to figure out what they were singing, what it meant, and Dan just kind of looked, and there was a group of young campers standing off to the right, and he just said, well, what do you guys think it means? This one girl just looked at him and said, I'll get back to you, and walked away. So the next day, they're doing whatever they do at camp during a day, and not really thinking about this anymore. It's a new day, time has moved on, and the girl found him and said, I think it means, help me find who I am deep inside. Help me see, help me see, help me see. Help me find who I am deep inside. Help me see, help me see, help me see. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. So then the director of the camp goes up to Dan and says, this is really amazing. And so yeah, she came up with these great words. And it turned out that this girl hadn't spoken the whole summer. Her parent had passed away, and she was there, and these were the first words that she said. So from this Native American melody that we didn't know what it meant, to just singing a nigun, just the melody, to connecting with these Hebrew words, to this young girl who spoke for the first time, and gave a deep meaning to this song. To us in this room right now. Help me find who I am deep inside. Help me see, help me see, help me see. Help me find who I am deep inside. Help me see, help me see, help me see. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la.
So we turn to page 101. Day softly tiptoes out through the western horizon. Soon night will encompass my heart to bring the shadows of fear and uncertainty. Words become blurred. They cease to touch my reason. Sound alone now moves me, carries me aloft before the golden gate. Faster, faster, I hear the chorus of the hosts on high. Not words, but God's soft, unspoken plea is heard. Keep open your gate, keep open your gate. Close not our last remaining hope. The stars wink down above me, the gate is closed. As I turn to walk the lonely path of another year. I've ceased to pray, the shofar calls an end, a ne'ilah. Yet as I leave God's sanctuary, God's silent shofar calls, God's plea, keep open your gates, for mine are never closed. So as we come to the last time for Yom Kippur that we offer our confessionary prayers, and we do that within the realm of the Amidah, which for the last time during the high holiday period, we will chant with the special insertions for the Book of Life. We recognize that this period is coming to an end. In just moments, we'll say goodbye to this time of beginning a year. So we take one last moment to ask for forgiveness. We take one last moment to try to get ourselves on a solid footing for a year which promises already to be one filled with challenges. We know that. And yet we hope and pray that we'll have the strength from each other, from our community, from our tradition, from God, and from within ourselves. As we turn back to page 10 for Chatzi Kaddish, the prayer that will transition us on page 10 for Chatzi Kaddish, the bottom half of the page.
Yitkadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yamad yivrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'hayedecho beit Yisrael bagala bagala uv'izman kariv v'yimeru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olam me'omaya Yitbarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitbaram v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalel v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'rechu le'la min kol berchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata damiram b'yama v'yimeru amen.
So as we turn to page 33 for the Amidah, and for the final time of the Amidah, and for the confessional prayers, for our Slichot prayers, we're going to ask you to rise as we open up the Ark. And again, if you have to, please be seated, but we'll be standing for this part of the service. Page 33.
Open up our eyes, teach us how to live, fill our hearts with joy and all the love you have to give. Gather us in peace, gather us in peace, as you lead us to your name,
As you lead us to your name,
and we will know that you are
and
one.
we will know that
You are one. Open up our eyes, teach us how to live,
teach us how to live,
fill our hearts with joy,
fill our hearts with joy, and all the love you have to give.
gather us in peace,
Gather us in peace,
as you lead us to your name,
as you lead us to your name, and we will know that you are one,
and we will know that you are. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Leah Elohei Rachel Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem Lema'an Shemo Be'ahava Zochreinu Zochreinu L'chaim Melech Hafiz B'chaim B'chol Ozer u'Moshiach u'Magen. Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechaye hakol atah, Rav le'Hoshia. Mechalkel chaim bechesed, Mechaye hakol berachamim rabim. Somech noflim ve'rofech olim, U'matir asurim. Umekayem emunato lishenei afar. Micha mocha bal gevurot umido melach. Melech memit umechaye umatzmiach Yeshua. Micha mocha av harachamim zocher yitzurav l'chaim berachamim. V'ne'eman atah l'chayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, Mechaye hakol.
Continue on page 34.
Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרון, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ, כבודו.
If you'll turn with us to page 102, page 102, back to the specific and very particular prayers for Ne'ilah, for this moment in front of the gates before they close. Patach lanu sha'ar be'et ne'ilat sha'ar, kifanayom, hayom yifneh, hashemesh yavo yifneh, navoa sha'arecha, ana elna, sana, salachna, nechalna, chamalna, rachemna, kaperna, kevosh chet, as we read responsively the bottom half of page 102, open for us the gates of righteousness, and we shall enter to praise. Open the gates, open them wide.
We knock at your gates, O gracious one. Do not turn us away empty-handed.
Open the gates, Lord, open the gates for us and for all Israel.
Open the gates of blessing for us all.
The gates of atonement, benevolence, and compassion.
The gates of dignity, excellence, and faith.
Generosity and hope, insight and joy.
Kindness and love, melody and nobility.
Openness, purity, and quietude.
Renewal, simplicity, and truth.
The gates of understanding and virtue.
The gates of wonder and zest.
Open the gates, open them wide.
Open the gates, Lord.
And as we continue on page 103, Avinu Malkeinu, but first we're going to read this responsively in English at the top half of page 103. Avinu Malkeinu, we have sinned before you.
Avinu Malkeinu, we have suffered by you.
Avinu Malkeinu, help us to return to you completely repentant.
Avinu Malkeinu, grant us a good year.
Avinu Malkeinu, send complete healing for our afflicted.
Avinu Malkeinu, frustrate the designs of our adversaries.
Avinu Malkeinu, remember us favorably.
Avinu Malkeinu, seal us in the book of goodness.
Avinu Malkeinu, seal us in the book of redemption.
Avinu Malkeinu, seal us in the book of sustenance.
Avinu Malkeinu, seal us in the book of merit.
Avinu Malkeinu, seal us in the book of forgiveness.
Avinu Malkeinu, hasten our deliverance.
Avinu Malkeinu, grant glory to your people Israel.
Avinu Malkeinu, hear us, pity us, and spare us.
Avinu Malkeinu, accept our prayer with mercy and favor.
Avinu Malkeinu, have pity on us and on our children.
Avinu Malkeinu, after those who purify our water for the sanctification of your name.
Avinu Malkeinu, act for your sake, if not for ours.
Avinu Malkeinu, graciously answer us, although we are without merit. Deal with us charitably and lovingly and save us.
Avinu Malkeinu, Aneinu Va'aneinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu Vanenu, Ki Ein Banu Masi. Say Imanu, Tzedaka v'chesed. Say Imanu, Tzedaka v'chesed. Ve'oshienu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu Vanenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu Vanenu, Ki Ein Banu Masi.
We have a song in the song sheet on page 2, a version of the Al-Kulam that we sang when we had the prayers earlier in the day, and again even last night we introduced this version of the Al-Kulam that was composed by Craig based on the traditional text of Al-Kulam Elohai Salichot, Salach Lanu, Machal Lanu, Kaper Lanu. And again, these are part of the ways that we, again, for the last moments here, ask for forgiveness one more time.
Al-Kulam Elohai Slichot, Slach Lanu, Mechal Lanu, Kaper Lanu. Al-Kulam Elohai Slichot, Slach Lanu, Mechal Lanu, Kaper Lanu. For all of these, we ask one thing of you. Forgive us, return us, grant us life anew. Al-Kulam Elohai Slichot, Slach Lanu, Mechal Lanu, Kaper Lanu.
For one final time, as part of the Amidah for this period, we turn back to page 37 for one last time to sing B'Sefer Chaim, as we ask God to write us into this book of life, to seal us now, tonight, into this book of life and blessing, peace and prosperity. May we and all your people, the house of Israel, be inscribed and now sealed for a good and peaceful life. We praise you, God, the source of peace. On page 37, B'Sefer Chaim.
B'Sefer Chaim bracha v'shalom
Ufarnasa tova Mizacher v'nikatev lefanecha Anachnu v'chol amcha Beit Yisrael L'chaim tovim u'leshalom Baruch atah Adonai oseh hashalom. So we have a tradition now of finishing the Ne'ilah, finishing this service with a final sound of the shofar. And I'm going to actually let the leaders of today's and throughout the holidays, Rick and Addie explain who's going to blow the shofar for us.
Well, our friends the Marcuses from Sherman Oaks are here, and we were with them in another place a number of years ago, and they're wonderful people, and when they found out that we were here, they decided to jump ship, or at least test the waters. And so, I don't know if
They
we're on
weren't
commission or
they were not
something, but-
heaved overboard, though. I want to make it clear that this was a willing decision.
Yeah, no, it was, we were not attached or anything but in that way. But so I'm really excited that they're here because they bring a great spirit. They bring many shofars and children with them. And so.
The entire family has learned to play shofar.
So if you will come up here to help us with the sounds of the shofar, we're going to turn back to page 104, page 104, which is the final words, if you will, of the High Holidays. Because the next page, I will tell you, there's a page we're going to do, but it's kind of like, well, it's the High Holidays are over. So this is really the last thing we do, because Havdalah, that we're going to finish with, is actually separating us from everything that we just did. But now we're going to hear the sounds of the shofar and kind of end. But first, before we do that, we have a tradition of, it's not our tradition, we didn't invent it, by the way, of saying the Shema and then saying the next line below, Baruch Shem Kavod, saying that 3 times. 3 times. There's the 3 there for you. But we have another one that's an important number. Of course, it's 7. And that's what we say the line below that, Adonai Hu HaElohim. So we're going to do that 7 times. So the Shema once, and Baruch Shem 3 times, and then Adonai Hu HaElohim 7 times. So this ritual for kind of proclaiming God's name, for, again, recognizing that we're going to get through this year with lots of help. And I'm not coughing because I'm sick. I have to now of course we all have to say that now. I actually don't know that, but I don't believe that I'm sick. Anyways, it's the worst thing you could possibly do right now is cough. Anyways, so we're going to finish up now with the final sounds, the sounds that you're going to make, and of course the sounds you're going to hear through the sounds of the shofar. So again, on page 104, we ask everyone to turn for our final words of the High Holidays, the final words of Ne'ilah.
Shema Yisrael,
Adonai
Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Adonai Hu HaElohim. 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 Adonai Hu HaElohim.
Give heed to the sound of the shofar, the long persistent call of the shofar, summoning the household of Israel to do God's will with devotion. Remember the sound of the shofar, the blast that is blown, O my people.
Tikia Gedolah.
So kids, my question is, does the parent who lasts the longer time on the shofar, Do they get bragging rights for the rest of the year or something? All right, well, that was fantastic. Beautiful. And I want to tell you something, folks. You've earned the right to break fast with us right now, because we're going to ask everyone to, again, we're going to turn down the lights a little bit. Thank you so much again, your Shah Kocham, the whole family. We're going to bring down the lights a little bit, because we're going to say the Havdalah prayers. Now, what's interesting about this Havdalah, folks, is we don't have a spices traditionally for Yom Kippur. And the reason is that, well, the theory, of course, is, I should say, the reason is that people used to use smelling salts to get them through. They would use spices to get them through Yom Kippur. So they were already using the spices. But these other things they weren't using. So we're going to...
So do we not say blessings for spices?
Yeah, there's no spice
Okay,
blessing.
all right. That sounds great. Okay.
I have another lighter. So, as we can ask everybody to at least get close to the people that they're here with, you know what? I'm going to use this brand new Havdalah candle. It's a brand new year.
Yes, it is. It's beautiful.
Beautiful Havdalah candle. Why don't we bring up your boy to hold this? Do we trust him with the candle? Here, Jude, you can hold it. Here, you want to hold the candle?
Oh, sure.
You want to hold that?
Trust
Do we trust you?
12-year-old with
I don't know. That's what I said. Do we trust him? Yeah, I do. So we're going to have the blessings over the. We're going to have the blessings over the grape juice, and we have the blessings over the candle, and over the separation between the holy and the normal. And so we have these blessings, and again, not a blessing for spices. We actually had, Rick and Addie joined us out at the beach. It was great. We had one of our largest crowds in many, many years, if ever, of all time, out at the beach. That was hard to believe. That was only a couple of weeks ago, folks. It was only like 3 weeks ago, wasn't it? It was about 3 weeks ago. We were out in Ventura, and we did the Havdalah blessings. And it had a little different feeling because, of course, we were outside under the stars. We were worried our cars wouldn't get locked into the parking lot out at the beach. They didn't, but it's close. We're always pushing it.
And it was very cold.
And it gets cold. It does get cold at the end, and windy, but we know what to do. We're ready. We're prepared. It's just it gets dark. So, so we're going to say these blessings again on page 105. You can see the blessings that we're going to say. And then, of course, we're going to wish everyone a Shavua Tov, a good week. But remember, the week's almost over because tomorrow night is Shabbat, and we will be online for Shabbat. But we are going to be back here in the synagogue the week after. Well, not in the synagogue, but outside the synagogue, outside for Sukkot, on the 24th, which is a week from this Friday. And again, Rick and Addie will help lead us in some special Sukkot songs and some poetry and some feelings of Sukkot being outside, right? I don't know. I'm assuming you have a poetry poem for Sukkot.
I guess now he's gonna have to write one.
You've never written a poem for Sukkot?
I'm not sure I have.
Oh,
But,
no.
There you go.
Oh, maybe.
As long as it's not happening
Challenge
right after
accepted.
this, it could probably happen.
All right. So let's say the blessings, folks. Do the Kiddush, the blessing over the Aish, over the candle, and again, the blessing over the separation that we're experiencing right now, and then we'll get to eating. But we also want to wish people Shana Tova. So we'll say Shavua Tov, but also Shana Tova. All right. The blessings of Havdalah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Shavua Tov, 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 Shavua Tov. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy and peace. A good year, a year of peace, may gladness reign and joy and peace. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishvi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hanavi. Imera Yameinu, Yavo Eloheinu, Imoshiach ben David, Imoshiach ben David. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishvi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagilati.
Well, we want to wish everyone a great year again, Shana Tova, and also we want to get people excited by wishing them Hag Sameach. Remember, join us for Sukkot coming up. We'd love to have as many people here for Sukkot outside in the sukkah. We're going to build it big enough for you all to be there. So come on, join us outside. Do we have any explanations for those who want to stay here for food, to have breakfast with us? Are there any explanations? Food is set up in that room, and then we're outside, eating outside. And we want to thank Neely Skillet. We want to thank Neil and Haiti and the Scott family for bringing the food and for getting it all set up for us. Thank you guys.
Rabbi, good job.
My fingers are wax.